Don't be afraid to fail. Set the bar high, and even if you undershoot, you will get somewhere.
Hello and welcome along to this Lloyds Bank Credible Transition Plans series hosted in association with Edie. I'm your series host and Edie's publisher, Luke Nicholls. And in this series, we're going to be sitting down with industry leaders across business, academia, policy and investment to discuss the real-world implications and transformative power of credible transition plans. In this episode, we're going to be looking at credible transition plans through the lens of net zero, to understand how the plans can be used as a framework to accelerate decarbonisation progress. And to discuss that, I'm thrilled to be joined here by Pietro Rocco, Head of Sustainable Finance at the Carbon Trust, and Khadija Ali, the Group Director of Sustainability and Responsible Business at Lloyds Banking Group. So let's get into the episode. Pietro, hello. Great to have you here. Big topic, net zero, that we're going to get into now. Give us a bit of an overview from your perspective, the Carbon Trust perspective, as to how credible transition plans can be used as a framework to drive progress towards net zero.
Look, the Carbon Trust has been in this space since basically the beginning, and we've seen it evolve so much, and credible transition plans is such an essential, if fairly new component. I mean, the way we view it is you've got the building blocks of a journey to net zero. And if you forgive me for using a sort of sailing analogy, the start line is that footprint, measuring, setting a baseline. You then set the target, and that's kind of your end goal, where you want to end up. And credible transition plans are really that direction of travel. They're effectively mapping out the journey. And corporates need that. I mean, you need to view it as a journey. You need to have all the elements in place to be able to get you there, and all the actions. And it's been a great development to see. I mean, particularly in the UK, seeing the UK kind of lead with a standard for this, with a framework that companies can use to really get a credible transition plan out that is consistent, that is robust, that is transparent and understandable.
Mm-hmm. I want to get into then how net zero goals and projects can be effectively integrated with these plans and vice versa. So what does good alignment look like?
Good alignment is basically full integration, right? That these should go really hand in hand. Your projects and effectively what you're going to do as a company should be consistent and ideally mentioned, even if at a high level, in a credible transition plan. And likewise, a transition plan should be analogous to what you think you might do. One thing that I think is really important is that, these are always dynamic. So it's worth thinking that, 2040, 2050 is a long way away. Most corporate strategies are 3 to 5 years, right? So you're going to have probably multiple iterations of a transition plan as you go through that journey. And that's where kind of you need to have that harmony between the projects and the ambitions and how you're deploying capital, how your business is evolving effectively, and what your plan looks like.
Okay, and Khadija, what's your view on this?
The way I see it is that when we're looking at an organization that doesn't have a clear net zero plan or a credible transition plan, it's around navigating quite blindly. It's akin to not having a financial plan or a business strategy. And so it's really important in telling that the regulatory landscape has also picked up on this. And we're also seeing global frameworks like the International Sustainability Standards Board, the ISSB, also really narrowing in on credible transition plans. So it comes back to the point that I made earlier, which is this is a business imperative in many respects. It's akin to having a business strategy. It's akin to having a financial plan. And actually, these components need to stack up together, which I think is a really important point. The credible transition plan isn't something that happens on the side of the organization. It's very much woven into your business strategy. It's woven into your financial planning and analysis. And I think those components have to come together to make it credible and for you to be able to demonstrate measurable progress in relation to what your institution is undertaking.
Yeah, okay. Lloyds Bank's reporting versus reality research found that over half now, 54% of institutional investors agree that companies with ambitious transition plans have a competitive edge right now. What could that competitive edge look like for you in the context of net zero and decarbonisation?
Yeah, I mean, I think the traditional theory is more to do with the resilience angle, that companies are effectively right-sized for the changes that are going to come and that are going to come fast. We're, I think, experiencing climate change live in real time. And those companies that effectively buy into that and buy into it from the corporate strategy perspective and the corporate planning perspective are those companies that will be set up to respond quickly and respond efficiently to the changes. Credible transition plans also offer investors a huge amount of transparency. And you mentioned, my role as head of sustainable finance is to kind of be that bridge within the Carbon Trust and within the organizations we work with between the financial sector and other types of organizations. And we're seeing a lot more push to transparency, to understanding, to effectively incorporate what companies say and plan to do in investment decision making. And climate risk is a big factor, and credible transition plans really do push kind of that angle of planning and transparency that really does help investors understand what a company's journey might look like.
Okay, and Khadija, let's bring you in here.
Our research demonstrates that institutional investors are really taking notice of the importance of credible transition plans, and most notably, the real economy impact that's coming off the back of those transition plans. That's a really important part of that credibility measure. In terms of benefits, I think first and foremost, it's around the regulation. As we know, we're starting to see a clear amount of transition across real economy sectors, and the regulations are helping to drive some of that activity. So being prepared in advance of those regulatory changes and ensuring that you're aligning to that is just, really good business practice as a start. The second is the opportunity lens. This is really more about how are you seeing industries shift and be reshaped by the transition. And being ahead of that curve allows you a first mover advantage in many respects. So again, we start to see strategy really being informed through the work of the credible transition plans, which give many organizations that competitive advantage and edge.
Of course, this is making me think about the kind of mandatory or non-mandatory element of credible transition plans. They are becoming mandatory for some companies in the UK and the EU, but can any company really reach net zero without formulating a plan like this?
Yes. Yes, they can. Will it be orderly? Who knows? I think when you look at the sort of global macro pathways related to the transition, we talk about the importance of an orderly transition. What needs to go in to make sure that we hit net zero, we hit a 1.5 degree target, but without kind of the chaos of a haphazard, totally inconsistent approach. The same applies at the company level or the organizational level. You could get there, you might get lucky and you might get there, but it's a hell of a lot easier to get there in a planned and clear and transparent way where you know what you need to do or what you intend to do. So yes, you could. I would probably say that whether it's mandatory for your company or not, it's almost essential to have it in order to make sure that you're getting there neatly.
Yeah, orderly.
Orderly, yeah.
And then finally, I'm ending on a relatively big question here, but with net zero targets, there could be a danger that corporates focus too heavily on the net aspect of things rather than the zero. How can credible transition plans ensure ambitious science-based targets and approaches to decarbonisation are developed in ways and shared in ways that negate concerns around greenwashing, in particular through things like offsetting, for example?
This is a really important question, and it can get quite complicated when you look into the mechanics. I think the way to keep it quite straightforward is to make sure that at the end of the day, we have what's referred to as the mitigation hierarchy integrated into the credible transition plan, almost like a guardrail. And what that means is that the priority is around emissions reduction within your value chain. And after that, you're looking at investments or activities that are beyond your value chain that can support reduction. And that's where we see the use of things like carbon credits or offsets. So that mitigation hierarchy, which really focuses that prioritization on reduction efforts, like your own actions to reduce rather than purchasing an offset, become the priority of the actual approach within the credible transition plans. And this is where organizations need to make sure that they've got that structure right, that they've actually looked at what actions they're undertaking before making active investments in offsets. we know this is a really important topic from an industry perspective as well. And this is where initiatives like the Science-Based Targets Initiative are actually looking at clearer guidance on this topic in regard. So I expect a lot of evolution in the short term, but this is something that's an area of focus. The one thing I would add is that that's not to say that looking at carbon offsets is not an appropriate approach. It's incredibly important to look at how you can mitigate beyond the value chain, which is often referred to as that BVCM. I know I'm getting a bit technical here, but that at the end of the day is looking not just at your organization, but the economy as a whole and how you're supporting that. But again, the principle is really, really clear and really important. Focus first on your value chain and then build on to beyond your value chain.
That's a really good point. And Pietro, what's your take on this?
Yeah, I mean, there's so much guidance, and I think we touched on this earlier, that for a long time there's been a lot of different sources of information on what does good look like, how do you do X, Y, Z. We're seeing a lot more consolidation, the transition plan task force being kind of incorporated into the IFRS Foundation, related to ISSB, which has TCFD. So all of this is starting to sort of come together under these bigger umbrellas, which I think will help organizations just find clarity and consistency in that. The net versus zero thing is such an interesting kind of debate. I think the push at the moment, and it's really related to this idea of ambition, is that, and from an investor perspective as well, people and markets and stakeholders want to see companies decarbonize, not compensate for not doing things. And that's a really, really important nuance in this, that the zero is more important than the net. You want to be looking at the residuals when it comes to carbon offsets or carbon credits, but fundamentally businesses need to change and evolve in a sustainable way so that they are right-sized for the future. I think when it comes to greenwashing, that's partly a communication question. It's relates back to that point around fear of failure. Communicate transparently, communicate openly. I wouldn't say divulge, but certainly disclose as rigorously as you can on all these topics.
Okay, well, on that note, I'm going to have to draw this episode of the Credible Transition Plans series to a close. A huge thank you to Pietro and Khadija for giving us this much needed deep dive into the relationship between credible transition plans and net zero. And on behalf of everyone here at Lloyds Bank and at Edie, hope you found this episode useful. If you have, I thoroughly recommend, as a next step, you check out the full reporting versus reality report, which has been referenced earlier on here. You can do that by searching Lloyds Bank Credible Transition Plans or going to lloydsbank.com/credible-transition-plans. But for now, from all of us here, it's goodbye.